December 1944. The Ardennes forest, silent, white, and waiting. Snow fell like ash over broken helmets. The ground shook from distant thunder, not weather, but war. Through the mist, a convoy of beaten men stumbled west. Their faces were gray with frost and defeat. Then came the voice, sharp, metallic, commanding. No one surrenders. You hear me? No one. General George S. Patton, goggles iced, jaw locked, eyes burning like magnesium. His Third Army was surrounded, starving and freezing. Every map screamed retreat. Every general begged for patience. Patton gave none. He saw what others couldn't, that the war's deadliest trap could become its turning point, if he could make men fight when their bodies begged to stop. This is the story of that moment, when one general defied the weather, the odds, and his own reputation, and in doing so, saved Europe from collapse. December 16, 1944. Dawn broke over Belgium as a low-gray blur. Inside the Ardennes, Allied soldiers thought they were resting. Christmas leave was days away. The front was quiet. Then thunder. At 5:30 a.m., more than 1,500 German artillery guns opened fire. Trees exploded. White snow turned black. It was the last gamble of the Reich. Operation Walk am Rhein. Hitler's desperate push to split the Allied line and capture Antwerp. 200,000 German troops. Over 1,000 tanks. And the Allies, barely a third of that. American radio operators called it chaos. They came out of the fog like ghosts. One wrote, entire regiments vanished into the forest. Roads jammed with refugees, jeeps, wounded. By nightfall, the front had collapsed into panic. The 106th Infantry Division ceased to exist. The 28th was torn apart, and the proud 101st Airborne, the same paratroopers who jumped into Normandy, found themselves trapped in the crossroads town of Bastogne, surrounded on all sides. The temperature plunged to minus 20 degrees Celsius. Frostbite claimed more men than bullets. Shells froze before exploding. Trucks wouldn't start. Inside Bastogne, medics ran out of morphine. They stitched wounds with wire. From his headquarters in Luxembourg, General Eisenhower read the first reports. He looked up at his commanders. Who can counterattack? Silence. Omar Bradley shook his head. The British were too far north. Hodge's First Army was broken. Only one voice answered. Patton's. He spoke without hesitation. Give me 2 days, he said, and I'll turn my army north. The room fell silent again, this time from disbelief. Patton's Third Army was 150 miles south, already committed to another offensive. Moving would mean spinning an entire front 90 degrees through blizzards and cratered roads. George, Eisenhower warned, you can't move that fast in this weather. Patton leaned forward. I can, and I will. Outside, the snow thickened, flakes swirling like ash over the ruins of Belgium. Inside, a war belief began. Because Patton's arrogance wasn't mere bravado. It was conviction weaponized. He believed momentum was moral, that retreat infected the soul faster than defeat. To him, surrender was a disease, and he'd rather burr his army out than let it catch. As dispatches poured in, the map of Europe looked like it was bleeding. Towns with strange names, St. Vith, Houffalize, Clairvaux, vanished under the German tide. Civilians fled west through snow-choked roads, whispering prayers as columns of panzers thundered past. Back at 3rd Army HQ in Nancy, France, Patton's staff received new orders, handwritten furious. Prepare to pivot entire army north. Objective, Bastogne. Colonel Harkin stared at the paper. Sir, that's impossible, he said when Patton arrived. Patton didn't even sit down. So is losing, he replied. Within hours, engines rumbled to life. Mechanics thawed diesel with blowtorches. Quartermasters scoured depots for winter gear that didn't exist. Officers redrew maps in pencil, tracing routes over frozen rivers and bomb bridges. In a single night, 250,000 men were ordered to move. Drivers packed rations, gasoline, and one rule, no one stops. A soldier from Texas wrote in his diary, it felt like we were being thrown into a storm with no roof and no floor. But the old man's eyes, They made you believe we could walk on snow. Patton's legend had always been loud. Pearl-handled pistols, profanity, the press calling him blood and guts. But that winter, his fury served a new purpose. It wasn't vanity, it was fuel. He knew his men were broken, cold, and terrified, so he gave them something louder than fear: himself. Still, even Patton couldn't outshout the weather. The blizzard grew thicker. Supply lines froze. The roads turned to glass. Somewhere in the whiteout, a convoy slid off a ridge. 30 vehicles gone in seconds. Others burned just to keep warm. By the third night, the radio crackled with a message from Bastogne. Surrounded. Low on ammo. God help us. Patton stared at the transmission, silent. Then he said softly, almost himself, God's busy. We'll handle it. He stepped outside into the snow, watching the sky, that endless gray ceiling that had grounded the bombers and blinded the scouts. Somewhere beyond it, he imagined destiny watching, testing his resolve. He turned to his aide. Tomorrow, he said, we move, no matter the storm. And tell my men, anyone thinking of surrender, don't. He smiled a hard, exhausted smile. Because I won't let them. The next morning, engines screamed to life. The Third Army began its impossible march north, into the blizzard, into legend. Night fell like ink over France. Columns of trucks stretched for miles. Headlights blacked out, engines coughing in the cold. From the air, they looked like a silent river of ghosts crawling through snow. Inside every cab sat a man running on coffee, adrenaline, and Patton's voice ringing in his head. No one surrenders. No one stops. The order had gone out just hours earlier, yet the Third Army was already on the move. Patton's staff had called it impossible. The Army's position was spread across 500 miles. Fuel was low. Roads were ice. Even the weather seemed to side with Hitler. But Patton didn't listen to the odds. He believed in one thing only: speed. If we can move faster than fear, he said, we win. And so, the greatest logistical pivot of the war began. At headquarters, typewriters clattered like machine guns. Dispatchers shouted over radios, rerouting entire corps northward. Fuel convoys rolled nonstop from Cherbourg. Mechanics worked by candlelight, stripping parts from wrecked tanks to keep others running. Every soldier became part of a machine, a human gear in a turning miracle. Colonel Harkins later said, it wasn't strategy anymore. It was belief. By dawn, 250,000 men and 1,000 tanks were grinding north through sleet and fog. The Army stretched over 60 miles. Trucks slid on black ice. Men froze inside turrets. But no one stopped. A private from Pennsylvania remembered driving 30 hours straight. My hands were glued to the wheel. The snow was so thick, I couldn't tell if we were on the road or not. But somewhere in my mind, I could hear him, Patton. I swear to God, it was like his voice kept us alive. Back in Luxembourg, Eisenhower watched the operation unfold with disbelief. How many divisions are moving? He asked. Patton's aide replied, all of them. It was true. The entire Third Army, 4 corps, 10 divisions, was turning north like a storm front, and they were doing it in record time. Even German radio intercepts couldn't believe it. One transcript from December 19th reads, the Americans are regrouping faster than expected. Impossible speed. Their commander must be insane. They were half right. Insanity or genius. For Patton, the line was thin. He drove his staff to exhaustion. He rewrote orders by hand. He demanded progress reports every hour. When an officer told him a bridge was frozen over, Patton snapped. Then drive across it faster, so it doesn't have time collapse. It wasn't sarcasm, it was conviction. He had studied Napoleon, Hannibal, Caesar. He understood that war wasn't won by those who waited. It was won by those who moved. That night, a snowstorm hit. Wind howled through valleys. Columns stalled. Tanks froze. But still, they pushed on. Patton didn't just command from a desk. He drove to front himself, his jeep plowing through drifts, his pistols gleaming beneath his overcoat. When he stopped at a supply convoy stranded in snow, a lieutenant shouted, Sir, the men can't go on without rest. Patton jumped from the jeep, boots sinking into ice. He looked the officer dead in the eye. "Son, men can sleep in heaven. Right now, we move." Those who saw him that night said it felt like watching a man possessed by fury, by faith, maybe by fate itself. As the Third Army crawled north, word spread through every division. "We're going to Bastogne." The name became a battle cry, because inside that frozen town, surrounded by tanks and artillery, the 101st Airborne still held on, hungry, exhausted, waiting. And Patton knew that if he didn't reach them soon, they'd be erased. At 2 a.m. on December 21st, Patton's headquarters received another transmission from the front. Bastogne nearly out of supplies. German armor closing in. He slammed his fist on the table. "We'll get there," he growled, "even if I have to drag this entire army by its damn tracks." And somehow, impossibly, the movement continued. Through sleet, through artillery, through nights, so cold men's boots froze to the floorboards. By December 22nd, 48 hours after his promise, the Third Army had completed its pivot. 250,000 soldiers, 1,000 tanks, and 25,000 vehicles had turned 90 degrees through hell and reached striking position. Patton's staff stared at the map in silence. They'd done it. He simply nodded. "Now," he said, "we attack." It wasn't triumph. It was inevitability. But even Patton knew they needed more than steel. They needed the sky, because above them, the storm still raged, grounding Allied bombers, blinding scouts, and freezing engines. And deep inside Bastogne, the men of the 101st Airborne waited under a gray, merciless sky. Could they hold long enough for help to arrive? Or would Patton's miracle end in snow and silence? Only one thing could decide whether, and Patton, never one to wait for luck, decided to demand it. December 23rd, 1944. The Ardennes had gone silent again, the kind of silence that feels wrong. Somewhere beneath that quiet, thousands of soldiers huddled in snow-filled foxholes, praying for daylight that wouldn't come. Their breath froze in the air. Rifles jammed. Rations ran out. Overhead, the storm refused to break. No planes. No supply drops. No rescue. And somewhere hundreds of miles away, George S. Patton looked up at that same sky and growled, "If the bastards won't give me weather, I'll take it myself." He called in his chaplain, Colonel James O'Neill. The man entered cautiously, Bible in one hand, fear in the other. Patton stood behind his desk, pacing. "I want a prayer," he said. O'Neill blinked. "A prayer, sir?" "For good weather. To kill Germans." The chaplain hesitated. It might take a while to compose. Patton's glare cut like a bayonet. "You don't have a while. Write it now." O'Neill stared down at his paper, hands trembling, and began to write. "Almighty and most merciful Father, we humbly beseech thee of thy great goodness to restrain these immoderate rains. Grant us fair weather for battle." Patton snatched the sheet, scanned it, and nodded. "Good. Print 10,000 copies. Distribute to every man in this army." The chaplain blinked again. 10,000? Patton's voice thundered. "Hell, make it 250,000. I want every soldier talking to God, and I want him to listen." That night, those words traveled through the frozen ranks. Men read the prayer by lantern light, muttering it through cracked lips. Some laughed, others cried, but they all read it. And then something changed. By morning, the wind had slowed. By noon, the clouds began to thin. By afternoon, the sun broke through. For the first time in days, Allied planes roared across the sky. C-47s dropped food, ammo, and hope into Bastogne. 47 Thunderbolts strafed enemy convoys. Soldiers pointed upward, stunned. "Patton did it," someone whispered. To the men, it felt like divine intervention. To Patton, it was proof of preparation meeting opportunity. He smiled as he watched the bombers pass overhead. "See," he said to O'Neill. "Now God's on our side, or maybe we're just finally on his." That night, Patton wrote in his diary, "The enemy fears our tanks, but what he should fear more is our faith." His faith wasn't religious in the way the chaplain's was. It was belief in will, in destiny, in movement. He'd built his entire life around it. Patton had once said, "A good plan, violently executed now, is better than a perfect plan next week." The storm breaking felt like proof that the universe agreed. As the skies cleared, his men pushed forward again, tired, frostbitten, half-blind, but driven by something bigger than orders. They were following a man who seemed to bend reality itself. One captain later recalled, "We were freezing, starving, dying. But when the sun came out, someone yelled, 'Patton's praying worked,' and the whole line just came alive again." You can't fake that kind of belief. Meanwhile, inside Bastogne, the 101st Airborne still held on. German tanks ringed the town. Their commander, General Heinrich von Luttwitz, sent an ultimatum: surrender. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe's reply was just one word: nuts. That defiance became legend, and it reached Patton within hours. When his aide read the message aloud, Patton laughed so hard he almost fell over. "Beautiful," he said. "Tell McAuliffe I'm bringing him dinner." But between him and Bastogne still lay 30 miles of frozen hell. Forests mined and riddled with ambushes, villages reduced to ash, roads too slick for tanks. Patton knew they'd need another miracle to break through. But now, the men believed miracles were possible. As one sergeant wrote home, "We used to think Patton was crazy. Now we think maybe he's chosen." That faith, that dangerous, contagious faith, would drive them straight into the bloodiest clash of the entire war. Because clearing skies meant visibility, and visibility meant both sides could see each other again. Patton looked north. He saw smoke over Bastogne. He turned to his driver. "Get the engines hot," he said. "Tomorrow we make history." Christmas Eve, 1944. The forest was burning again, red tracers slicing through falling snow, explosions lighting up pine trees like a twisted holiday. Men fought knee-deep in drifts stained black with smoke. Somewhere in that chaos, Patton's tanks thundered north toward Bastogne. Every mile was earned in blood. The 4th Armored Division led the charge, engines screaming, tracks spinning over ice. German 88mm guns waited behind every ridge, invisible until they fired. The shells came in with a sound soldiers would never forget, a tearing scream, like the air itself being ripped apart. A radio operator shouted above the noise, "We're pinned down." From his command car, Patton barked back, "Then pin them down harder." To him, motion was oxygen. Stall and you die. Through the night, his men crawled forward, sometimes only 50 yards at a time. Frostbite turned fingers purple. Blood froze before it hit the ground. Yet nobody stopped. They had one mission: reach Bastogne before it vanished. Inside the town, the 101st Airborne was barely holding. Ammunition was rationed by the bullet. Medics melted snow for water. Every house had become a fortress. When German tanks broke through the outskirts, paratroopers waited until they were 20 yards away, then fired bazookas from attics. The explosion shook the frozen windows. One young lieutenant wrote in his diary, "We got one shell left. After that, it's knives and fists." On Christmas morning, German envoys arrived under a white flag. They delivered an ultimatum to General McAuliffe: surrender or die. McAuliffe scribbled his answer on a scrap of paper. One word: nuts. That note crossed enemy lines. And for a moment, both sides laughed in disbelief. But behind the humor lay desperation, because defiance alone couldn't stop tanks. They needed rescue. They needed Patton. And he was coming. At 4 p.m. on December 26th, the leading tanks of the 4th Armored Division reached the southern road into Bastogne. German machine guns raked the snow. Patton's men blasted through them yard by yard. A tank commander named Abrams, yes, the one later honored with America's main battle tank, radioed, "We're breaking through." Minutes later, his Sherman crashed through the last barricade. Dust, ice, and smoke filled the street. A paratrooper stepped out of ruins, filthy, limping, still holding his rifle. "Glad to see you boys," he said. Abrams just grinned. "We had a little trouble finding you." Cheers erupted across the town. Some men cried openly. Others just stared at the tanks as if afraid they were dreaming. For 6 days they had fought without rest. Now, The nightmare cracked open into relief. Outside the city, Patton stood beside his command car, snow on his overcoat, binoculars in hand. When the message came, Bastogne relieved, he didn't smile. He simply muttered, "About damn time." Then, almost quietly, he said, "Merry Christmas." But the battle wasn't over. The German offensive still raged along the 80-mile front. Patton's counterattack had punched a hole in the enemy's line, but thousands more fought on. In the next weeks, his divisions clawed back town after town, turning Hitler's grand gamble into a slow retreat. By mid-January, the bulge on the Allied map was gone. The price, nearly 90,000 Allied casualties. The snow had turned red, then brown, then disappeared with a thaw. When reporters asked Patton how he'd done it, he said only, "The trick was simple. We never stopped moving." To the soldiers, that motion felt like destiny itself. Brutal, relentless, unstoppable. They'd followed a man who refused to recognize the word impossible, and somehow impossibility obeyed. As the guns fell silent, one corporal wrote home, "I don't think we fought for glory. We fought because the old man made us believe quitting was worse than dying." The Ardennes forest lay still again. The trees blackened, the snow melted into mud. Patton's tanks rested, engines ticking as they cooled. But for the general, rest was foreign. He knew this victory wasn't just tactical, it was personal. He'd proven that willpower could outpace weather, fear, even fate. Still, in the quiet after battle, another thought crept in. How many men had frozen for his orders? How many prayers had gone unanswered so that it could come true? For the first time in weeks, Patton felt the weight of the cost. He turned from the battlefield and whispered, "God, help the ones we couldn't save." And yet, deep down, he already knew what the history books would never fully capture. That victory is never clean. It's written in blood, snow, and silence. The Battle of the Bulge was over, but for Patton, the war inside him had just begun. January 1945. The snow was melting into rivers of mud, but Patton's mind was still on fire. The world hailed him as a savior, the man who broke the bulge. Yet he didn't feel victorious. He rode along roads lined with wrecked tanks and white crosses. Every few miles, he ordered the jeep to stop. He'd step out, stand in silence, and stare at the graves. "Fine soldiers," he muttered. "Better than I deserved." To outsiders, he was iron metal swagger, the polished ivory pistols. Inside, the cracks were spreading. He wrote to his wife, "I sometimes wonder if God lets me win to remind me how much I owe him for every life lost." He'd waged war, but the killing hadn't stopped inside his head. Sleep came in bursts. He'd wake in the night, hearing engines, snow crunching, men shouting his name. The press wanted triumphal speeches. Washington wanted diplomacy. Patton wanted motion. Stillness felt like decay. In briefings, he argued that the Allies should keep pushing, all the way to Berlin, before the Soviets did. Eisenhower said no. Patton slammed the table so hard the ink bottles jumped. "We've got the enemy running," he shouted. "Now we stop? That's not victory. That's politics." But the order stood. His army was told to hold position. For a man who lived by momentum, being forced to halt was torture. He paced headquarters like a caged lion, studying maps that no longer mattered. His officers tried to lighten the mood. One joked, "At least you made Hitler's Christmas miserable." Patton didn't laugh. "I also made widows," he said quietly. In private moments, he confessed to Chaplain O'Neill, "Maybe God let me lead because I was the only fool arrogant enough to keep moving. But arrogance carries a bill." He knew he was paying it. By April 1945, Germany was collapsing. Patton's tanks rolled into towns that looked like ghost cities, flags torn, civilians starving. He ordered his troops to feed them. "Compassion is discipline too," he said. It was the same lesson the war had carved into him. Mercy could be stronger than hate. When the fighting finally stopped, Europe was rubble. Patton should have felt peace. Instead, he felt emptiness. Reporters asked what victory meant. He answered, "It means we get to start the next war from a better position." It was half joke, half prophecy, because within months, the Cold War was rising. His bluntness made enemies in Washington. He was too honest for peacetime. By the end of 1945, he was removed from command. Still, he wrote constantly in his journal. He spoke of his men, of destiny, of the price of leadership. One entry read, "The hardest thing for a soldier isn't battle. It's surviving it." That December, while inspecting his troops in Germany, Patton's car collided with a truck. He was thrown forward, his neck snapping against the glass. He was paralyzed instantly. When medics reached him, he whispered, "This is a hell of a way to die." 12 days later, he was gone. At his funeral, the sky over Luxembourg was gray, like the day the bulge began. Thousands of soldiers lined the road, silent. A single tank fired its gun once, the echo rolling through the valley. On his gravestone were 6 words that summed up his life: duty, honor, country, faith, courage, glory. But maybe his truest legacy was simpler. He never let his men surrender, not to the enemy, not to fear, not even to the cold. And through that defiance, he taught them something no manual ever could. That courage isn't loud. It's the quiet refusal to stop moving when the world freezes around you. The Battle of the Bulge ended the war's last great nightmare, but also revealed a truth that still echoes in every uniform. Victory is never about conquest. It's about endurance. As the film of his life fades to black, Patton's voice lingers. The line he wrote just weeks before his death: "The soldier fights not because he hates what's in front of him, but because he loves what's behind him." History remembers battles. But what shapes nations are the men who refuse to break when breaking would be easier. If this story moved you, stay with us. More forgotten moments are coming, where defiance, faith, and fire change the course of the world.